listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you already know I'm obsessed with gut health. But I promise you have never heard it explained like this before. And today's episode is going to not only stretch your brain, but get you fired up because we are getting pretty nerdy over here. My guest is Josh Dech, a former paramedic turned gut health detective, and everything he has to share is not only incredibly interesting, but also so practical and so relevant to every single one of us. And I truly can't even not wait for you to dig in. Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Sukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a busy life. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit funny, and a little bit revolutionary. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth Sukup, and I'm the founder of Thinlicious and the creator of the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. And today we are going to be chatting with Josh Dech, host of the Reversible podcast and founder of the Gut Health Solution. He's a holistic nutritionist and a leading consultant for physicians across North America in the field of gut health. It's an interview that goes deep, I'm telling you right now, and it covers a lot. So without further ado, I am so excited to be able to introduce you to today's interview guest, Josh Dech. Josh, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so excited to talk to you about all the things.
Ruth, it's a pleasure to be here. All the things is such an umbrella, and I'm so excited to just open it up and see where it lands.
Let's open it up. I love it. Well, why don't we just start by hearing who you are, what you do, how you got to be doing what you're doing now.
I'll make a long story short. I used to be a paramedic, and it was sick care, not health care. We picked the same people up for the same things over and over for the same diseases until they died, and they got more medication while they were still living for the same diseases that nobody ever actually fixed. They just managed. And so I left that, got into personal training. Woman that came to see me really early in my career. She was actually 59 years old at the time. Her name was Lynn, and she was on 17 pills and insulin for breakfast, 9 pills and insulin for dinner. And this is not uncommon for the standard American over 50, 60 years old. And she was on disability at work, high blood pressure. She slept with a CPAP machine. She was overweight, dealing with all these issues. Within 2 years' time, Ruth, 2 years is all it took of just diet, health, and lifestyle and exercise. She was off all but 2 medications. And here she is now. Sorry, she started with me at age 57 rather. And here she was now at age 59. And she broke a world record as a weightlifter in the Canadian Raw Powerlifting Federation.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow.
Right? Super amazing.
What a testament. Like,
I mean, the capacity of the human body.
We could go out just off on that tangent for the whole time because I'm telling you, it is crazy to me that the modern medicine that we have, where it's pills. Let's just give you more pills and give you more pills and it's like sticking a Band-Aid on it, right? And it's not healing you. It's not fixing it. And yet there's such an easy solution. Like there's a way to fix this without the drugs. So let's talk about, you're going to get me going today.
I'm gonna get you riled up. Well, that's the short of it. Moved on to nutrition.
Riled up. Yes, for sure.
And now here we are specializing in gut. That's all. That's the long of it.
Yes. Well, let's talk about gut health. Let's start there because North America is basically the capital of gut disease for the world. And why is that?
Well, it's really interesting to look at statistically. And so, I actually now have the pleasure of working as a physician's consultant and a medical lecturer. And of course, all these things that we do. And this is the information that even they, being on the inside of this, aren't privy to until someone shares it with them. North America is the gut disease capital of the world because depending on the stats that we look at, whether it's a small study of 2,000 or a large one of 70,000, estimates are roughly 70% of Americans experience some kind of gut issue at least once a week. Now that's gas, bloat, pain, cramping, constipation, diarrhea, like whatever low-grade issues that could be construed as IBS or irritable bowel syndrome. That's the low grade. But here's what you have to consider. And this is sort of where we're breaking the mold in gut health and gut disease. I now specialize in Crohn's colitis. And what I've done is separated this because Western medicine for decades now has said, well, irritable bowel syndrome, so IBS, and IBD or Crohn's colitis are different. But even in their studies and research papers, it's a Venn diagram where they overlap. They kind of actually look the same. It's just more severe. So we said, what if this bloat, pain, cramping, constipation that 70% of Americans have once a week is like a wear and tear, where if you're wearing a pair of shoes without socks and that heel starts to rub, it gets red, in blisters, in bleeds, and it'll wear down to the bone eventually if you let it. And that's sort of this progression. Now, some people progress very quickly, some don't, but either way, we see this progression of disease. Now, 70% experience this low-grade issue, but consider this. There's roughly 7 million, give or take, upwards of 8 million cases of inflammatory bowel disease worldwide, Crohn's colitis. The United States of America is 5%, or North America is 5% of the global population, but they have more than 50% of the global cases of inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's colitis. So we have 70% who are starting now, who are getting more and more severe, and 5% of the globe, which is North America, has 50% of the worst case scenario. So we are, bar none, the gut disease capital of the world. And this is a challenge where the medical system goes, well, these diseases are idiopathic, meaning unknown cause. They're just genetic. Well, that's a statistical impossibility. And if it is genetics, I mean, consider this. Back in 1990, there was about 3 million global cases. Today, it's 7 to 8 million, half of them being in the US. So that can't possibly be genetic. You can't
Yeah,
grow in 2, 3
doesn't
times your
track.
cases. It doesn't happen, right?
No.
So the data that these doctors are given is completely wrong. So they're stuck in this ideology of, well, these diseases are genetic. There's nothing we can do. So medicate and manage, and we treat disease like it's innate to our biology. And it's so backwards. Everything is a cause of it. And I go off on a tangent here, but I'll stop
Oh,
myself there.
you can go off on that tangent. So let's back up a little bit because gut health is so intrinsic to overall health, right?
Totally.
And so explain that a little bit more. Like why is it so essential?
That is such a great question. So it's really interesting. Like our guts integrate with everything. I argue much of the time they are as important as our DNA. They even integrate with and influence our genetic expression. And so we look at what our gut and our gut bacteria do. There used to be an estimate that it's 10 to 1, that we are born 99% human cells, 1% microbes. And by the time we die, we're 10% human and 90% microbes. So we're actually more microbes than humans, being fungi and yeast and bacteria and parasites. Estimates have varied. Some people say it's 1 to 3 or whatever. It doesn't matter. But long and short, there's trillions of them, 50 to 100 trillion of these microbes. Now, they do all kinds of things for us. They ferment food, they help detoxify and digest and create all kinds of vitamins, they balance out hormones. They do all kinds of things for us that are integral to our health and well-being and even our genetic and DNA expression. And so these gut microbiomes have a very structured way of coming about from birth to life to death. And there's so much in our Western world that interrupts this perfect process. And that's whether it's being born C-section, which is happening more and more. It used to be, 5%, now it's almost 30%. Whether it's the antibiotics early on, whether it's being bottle fed versus breastfed, there are so many things that really interrupt this into this growth and development of our microbiomes. And we hear microbiome and go, well, what does that even mean? Micro and biome. Micro is small, biome is ecosystem. And so it's this ecosystem and community of microbes we have living in our digestive system. And they actually change every 12 to 24 inches. We actually have a different community that all get along and they integrate with different organs along the way to digest our food. And they do all kinds of amazing things for us. But these diseases that we have, these gut diseases that are developing, which makes us the gut disease capital of the world, is because we've had this agreement that I help you. I will create an environment for you with food and nutrients where you can grow and flourish and thrive inside my body. And in return, you produce vitamins and help me detoxify and do all these checks and balances. You create, 70 to 80% of my immune cells are grown in my gut. You do this for me, I do this for you. In the last 100 years or so, we completely broken that agreement. And so now our guts are sort of fighting with our body. They're no longer living in cohabitation and we're riddled with disease because of it.
Yes. So what would be like the ideal scenario? Let's say in a perfect world
Mm.
where you have a perfect healthy gut? Like how are you born? What did you eat? What do you eat all through your life? Like what does that look like? And then how does that compare to what we're doing right now?
Oh, that's such a great question.
Probably know how it would compare, but
I think you
tell
have an
us.
idea. I'm going to go
Tell
with the
us
fact
what
you
would
have an
be the
idea.
ideal scenario? Because I'm even thinking like, gosh, if I was going to have a child now, I'm already thinking like, first of all, I'm a mom who has teenagers, so now I've already screwed my kids up. So it's too late for them, but maybe my grandkids will be good. So what do
Sure.
I need to do?
How do we help them? Well,
Yeah, how do we help them? Give me the starting point. How do I do it right next time?
all right, I got you covered. All right. So there are four main ways that an infant will become exposed to or colonized by bacteria. So the first is going to be in utero, that's development. The second is at or during birth. The third is during the early days of breastfeeding. The fourth will be the food and environment around them as they grow and develop. And so we used to believe that the placenta was totally sterile, but that's long since been debunked. And more interestingly, we also thought the fetal gut or the digestive system of a growing fetus was actually sterile, but they've actually studied fecal meconium. Meconium is like fecal stool, basically, or fetal stool, and they realize that there's bacteria actually present in the gut prior to birth. And so there's been some interesting research on colonization. It's kind of spotty, but we also know the mother's gut microbiome, so that community of gut bacteria actually changes between the first and the third trimester, more so during the second and the third. But there's certain gut bacteria that start to increase in mom as she's growing this baby, which happen to be the first ones that colonize the infant microbiome. So as a baby is breastfeeding and growing and developing, they get bifidobacterium, your lactobacillus, the ones you typically see on the shelf at a drugstore and a probiotic. These actually grow in increased amounts in mom. But here's what's really interesting. These bacterium are associated with increased immune system, enhanced inflammatory responses, and they're also thought in these higher levels to increase permeability and what we call bacterial translocation, which means moving these things from place to place. Now, we might think, well, increased immune inflammatory responses and gut permeability is bad. But here's what's really interesting. They did a study where the intestinal microbiota from pregnant women were actually given to germ-free mice. They sterilized their intestines as best they could, took feces from these pregnant human women and gave them to the mice. And researchers found that these mice actually had changes to their body that were associated with pregnancy. So weight gain, insulin
Huh,
resistance, elevated immune responses. So these are the
interesting.
signals. It is super interesting. These are the signals the immune system actually gets, the body gets from your microbiome. So this can actually explain why the Western world sometimes treats pregnancy more like a disease or a condition, because they have these low-grade systemic inflammatory markers observed in the blood of healthy pregnant women. Well, the mother and the fetus share a blood supply, as well as cells through something called microchimerism, which is where they actually transfer cells of each other back and forth, which is part of the bonding process. But a large part of the metabolites, we call these byproducts in the blood, are actually from mom's microbiome, which are shared with her baby. And so a lot of these leaky guts and these inflammatory and immune responses can actually help transfer these microbes in utero from mom to baby before it's even born. And so
Hmm.
that's the first stage. That's one of
Yeah.
four.
Yeah.
so
So then so then you move on
so
to
so now we move on. Now we have birth. And this is
yes.
really interesting because when a baby is born, actually coming through the birth canal, through the vaginal canal, we know that there's another colonization of like microbes coming through this birth canal on the skin and even gets into the mouth and the gut. And it's really important. If you look at it's very important to come through the birth canal. Look at what happens when you take a hatching chick and you break the egg for it, it can actually die from failure to thrive because it doesn't build that strength and those hormones and the stimuli from pecking away and breaking its own shell. It
Yeah.
fails to thrive in the outside world. Well, there is an association with babies born C-section versus vaginal birth who are very, very different. C-section babies, this is a 2020 study in the Environmental Research and Public Health that showed C-section babies developed respiratory and neurological disorders like autism, schizophrenia, or immune-related diseases, asthma, skin issues, celiac,
Really?
juvenile arthritis, diabetes, type 1 diabetes, or obesity from being born C-section because they
Huh.
lack all these vital immune bacteria plus that failure to thrive, because he even tested the umbilical cords of babies born C-section versus vaginal, and they found the vaginal birth babies had higher levels of cortisol from the struggle coming through the birth canal, which increased their ability to thrive as they
Yeah.
develop.
Wow. But
It's
they don't talk
really,
about that.
they don't talk about that,
They
and we're
don't
seeing
talk about that.
C-sections increasing and bottle feeding
Yeah.
being pushed more.
Yeah.
But this gets really scary because we
Yeah.
know that breastfeeding is well known to be associated with better short and long-term health outcomes for babies as they develop to adults. We know that infants not being breastfed has a strong association with increased infectious morbidity, so infections that create disease, as well as things like childhood obesity, again, type 1 and 2 diabetes, even leukemia. And there was a meta-analysis of 19 different studies that they had done, which concluded babies who were bottle fed versus breastfed were twice as likely to die from sudden infant death syndrome known as SIDS. And so,
Wow.
excuse me, yeah. And so there are some moms who cannot breastfeed, and that's okay. We have to do what we have to do. But if you have the choice, clearly going as close to nature intended is the better way to go about this.
Yes. In all things.
In all things, always. So that's
In
our
all things.
yeah, that's our
That's the
three or
motto.
four ways that we develop bacteria. There is
Yes.
a fourth if you'd like to dive into that one.
Yes.
Okay. So the fourth way, this is after, so we've gestated, the baby is born and the baby's been breastfeeding. And this is where we start to develop through like our food and our environment, through interactions with the outside world. So consider that best case scenario is growing up with the best possible microbes and the best health outcomes. You are born on a farm through the birth canal. You're living and growing up on organic, pesticide and glyphosate-free farms. You're interacting with nature. You're, playing with animals and digging in the dirt. You're getting sunshine, exposed to the elements. And you're not engaging in these standard Western American lifestyles. That's best case scenario. On the far end of that spectrum, worst case, picture a C-section birth who's never breastfed, and they're bottle fed strictly instead. They live in a high rise in New York City, and just insult to injury, say they are in the height of the pandemic and everyone's masked and everything's sterilized, everyone's inside, you live by yourself or you're homeschooled with no pets. That's like the least exposure. So you have
Yeah.
farm raised natural versus city raised sterilized. And these are two very different paths to development. And so knowing what we know about how we grow and develop through exposure, we can see how these is sort of open the window to any and all disease. And we've seen this in studies looking at communities from, say, rural Nigeria versus urbanized Western societies. We can see massive differences in our ability to break down fiber and all kinds of stuff. In Western societies, we lose a lot of those microbes. And so what we're doing, everything we're doing, really, we don't live in a
Everything's
world.
wrong.
It's no longer compatible with our biology. It's so wrong.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so we understand the ideal situation now, like what we all wish we would have had. And gosh, makes me want to be Amish all of a sudden.
No, I'm trying to buy a farm right now.
Yeah. But what happens then? Now we're adults, right? We can't go backwards. We can't do it over again. How do we fix it?
Well, next to going back in and breastfeeding, we can look to do as many things as we can to continue inoculating ourselves. So avoid hypersterilization, get outside, engage with things, touch people, get in the sun, get in nature, have pets, go visit a farm a couple times a year. If you have friends, go help with the yard work on the weekends. These are just great ways to generally expose. We have to consider we're also doing things that are destroying our guts. And now, we're able to reverse some of the worst digestive diseases like Crohn's and colitis, which are supposed to be unfixable, because we're addressing some of these things, which are really quite basic in addition to. Because here's the problem. So many of us have been exposed to all these things. We destroyed our microbiomes in our guts. We've destroyed all this ecosystem that's supposed to be working in conjunction with us. But then we take it a step further, and now we have a body that can no longer properly defend itself. What happens? We now have invaders. We have overgrowth of opportunistic microbes that shouldn't be there. We have an overdevelopment of parasites where they enter and they're no longer fought off and they start to grow and develop these diseases. And so you have people forever managing symptoms. So what can we do? We can, if you want to drain the bathtub, turn the water off, right? That's the first things first. And so we have to stop doing the things contributing to the disease, whether that's eating organic as often as you can. Or like I don't buy organic because the label's 3 times expensive and it's stupid. But what I'll do is I'll go to the farmer's market and I say, hey, what do you
Mhm.
guys use on your produce? Well, I buy from a farm. They come out of BC. It's picked one day and then brought in the next. So it's a day old. It's not, 3 weeks on the shelf. They use one fungicide spray at the beginning of the year and that's it. But that excludes them from being organic. But in the USA, there's 18 to 20,000 different pesticides approved for use. There's billion+ pounds sprayed on our food every year. It's no wonder our guts are in such disarray. And so if we can simply change a handful of meals a week, or if you eat fruit, go to the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, check the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen list. The Dirty Dozen are the 12 foods I will never, ever eat inorganic because they are so filthy ridden with pesticides. And you can tell the difference. They hurt. If you avoid them for long enough and you eat them, they do hurt your gut. You
Yeah.
can feel it. You feel brain
Yeah.
dead. You feel sluggish. You feel like there's pain. And even some clients start to develop blood and mucus in their stool if things get severe enough. So those are really basic ways that we can just
Yeah.
start to safeguard and begin regrowing.
So stop putting the bad stuff in, which means eating the right stuff. I want to talk more about the Crohn's and colitis because I'm fascinated. I have friends with both Crohn's and colitis, so I'm very familiar with just how devastating both those conditions can be.
Mhm.
But quick question that I want to ask first before I forget is about the effects of the pandemic and what you were saying
Mhm.
about this whole generation. I mean, we've talked like, I mean, we don't talk about it on this podcast very much, but I've often thought like thinking back to the pandemic and how difficult it was to like homeschool my kids when I'm a work from home mom, my husband is home full time, we've got 4 computers in our house, and all the high speed internet, like we had access to everything and it was still hard. And
Yeah.
I've thought like, man, what a class division for the families that didn't have access to all the things that we had, and how like the impact of that is going to be generational. But what you're saying is the impact of that is going to be generational from just a health perspective, from people social distancing and not getting like there's a whole generation of kids who are born during those few years that didn't get outside, that didn't get around people, that like what do you think is gonna what we're gonna see from that in the future?
I think we are in for a really rough ride down the road. We know that early onset, that early development of health really sets the stage. Just like building a foundation, you build your house on sand versus stone, one's going to collapse eventually. And so you can constantly try to reinforce, but sometimes it is a constant uphill battle. Now, the good news is the microbiome doesn't really set like a thumbprint, so to speak, till 3, 4 years old, depends on who you ask. So there is sometimes still room for this development and growth early on, and it continues to grow. Think of it like throwing seeds into a meadow before it turns into a rainforest. It's easier to inoculate this meadow than it is a full-grown established rainforest, right? And so this is what we start to see. But this is some interesting work from Dr. Sabine Hazan. She's notorious for this stuff, speaking out about what's happened with the virus and the jabs and all these things and how they've completely wreaked havoc on things like bifidobacterium, which we need for our immune systems. We need them for short-chain fatty acids and anti-inflammatory. They have so many benefits, but these have ripped them apart and decimated 90 to 100% in some cases of people's guts. It's almost sterilized vital bacteria. And
Oh
so
my gosh.
it's horrific. And we're seeing so
Yeah.
much disease. And these bacteria, they're not just there to like make vitamins and clean us out. There's actual signaling molecules they produce that help your immune system keep checks and balances, hormones, and all kinds of things that they do back and forth. They signal, they create neurotransmitters. Like every disease under the sun, every condition, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, mental health, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, these are all connected to the gut, as is acne and arthritis and psoriasis. And anything you can name can be traced back to the gut. In fact, 14 out of 15 of the leading causes of death, as per CDC, that's 93%, are chronic inflammatory conditions that we connect right back to the gut. So, right? 93% of the
It's
deaths could be avoided.
It's like it couldn't be a more important topic. And if you're worried about your health at all, this you have to be focused on this. Like you cannot ignore it because it is so critical to every piece.
Yeah.
And we talk a lot about hormones and insulin resistance and all of those things, but it's all connected to gut health as well. Like your body does not work in a vacuum, right? There's no one part of it that works in a vacuum. And so if you're not okay, so let's talk about I want to make sure we have
Drink
enough
it from
time
a fire hose.
for
Yeah.
Crohn's and colitis, because doctors basically say these are incurable, right? Forever diseases. You can maybe manage your symptoms, but you can't fix it. Why do you say that it can be fixed?
Well, if you look at it from the ideology of disease being innate to our biology, it's unfixable. It's just, this is part of you now. And your Crohn's is a budesonide or a Stellara or Humira deficiency, which makes no sense. Think about it this way. This is the simplest way I can explain it here, Ruth. Everything in your body has a cause and effect reaction. Me bending and straightening my arm is the cause of my bicep contracting and my tricep relaxing. My muscles contracting and relaxing is a byproduct of sodium and potassium or calcium, magnesium moving in and out of these pumps on a cellular molecular level. Everything is cause and effect. Your body has dozens, literally hundreds of checks and balances inside of it to keep your immune system from randomly attacking yourself. And if something does or becomes cancerous, there's half a dozen cells that get right there and boom, kill it right away. So it's not this, you can't just wake up one day suddenly allergic to yourself out of the blue. Inflammation always has a root cause, even something as complex as Crohn's colitis, but we're not even looking for the root cause. If you get pink eye, you should have washed your hand after touching your butt. If you got a burn, you touched something hot. It's cause and effect. Inflammation in the gut is no different. And the ideology that you can go from healthy to sick practically overnight and it just be your body suddenly being allergic to you is absolutely asinine, and it flies in the face of everything we know about healthcare. It's like saying gravity doesn't exist. It is such a true solid to our very existence. This is an illogical fallacy, and we're proving it left, right, and center. I was literally just on TV. There's a TV show called Know the Cause a couple months back in February this year out in Dallas, Texas, because a gentleman that we had who had Crohn's, who had ulcerative colitis rather for 17 years, poof, gone. Took us 6 months, pulled it out of his system, completely reversed. He's eating healthy. He's traveling, no medications, no drugs. His family years back they prepared for his death on his deathbed many times. He was on the brink, all the drugs, nobody could fix him. But we went in, found what was causing the inflammation, what his body was attacking. We removed it. He just got back from Greece. He was eating as he pleased. He was traveling around. He's like, I've never felt better. I'm eating foods I've not eaten in 2 decades. Because
That's amazing.
it can
So
be.
what was causing the inflammation?
Well, it's interesting. So we break it down to a couple different things we typically see. So sometimes it's typically a form of dysbiosis or imbalance of the gut bacteria. We see things like Clostridia overgrowth. We see a lot of parasites, like a shocking amount of parasites. We see fungal overgrowth. We see mold and mycotoxins. We see E. coli and other bacterial issues. But interesting enough for him, it all started, we talked about that wear and tear, like pair of shoes with no socks. His started 20, 25 years ago when he got his gallbladder removed. And so something was causing toxicity that junked up his liver, which led to either poor bile acid production or bile salts, whatever it was, because the gallbladder is really part and parcel, or it's subject to what the liver is doing. So his liver junked up, which caused his gallbladder to go, which caused them to snip, remove it rather than deal with the problem, which led to this progressive wear and tear. If you take someone off the assembly line at Ford Motor Company, eventually when things get to the end, they're not going to be as they should. And the longer you do this, the worse things tend to get. Now, the other parts of the assembly line have to work harder or try to compensate. Those workers get tired. They wear and tear. They injure themselves trying to keep up. And now you have a completely junked up, dysfunctional, what could be a vehicle at the back end. These are really how diseases develop. And so his started with the gallbladder. But I have an example of a fella at 21 years old, perfectly healthy, perfectly healthy. And within 2 months starting a new job, he went in, just coincidental, started this new job. 2 months in, he got irritable bowel syndrome, IBS. 6 months after that, he developed blood in his stool, went to the doctor, and now he's diagnosed with IBD, ulcerative colitis, proctitis, so the lower rectum. Well, his doctor said, I kid you not, Jewish people tend to get this disease more than other people. You're Jewish, your family's Jewish, and this is why you have it. Nothing we can do. It's genetics. Here's some mesalamine pills.
No.
I kid you not. And so here's what happened. Didn't take long to figure it out. His new job, he started in HVAC. He's in ventilation. He's working in new homes and old homes and renos. I said, did you wear your PPE? What's PPE? That tells me everything I need to know. It's personal protective equipment. Didn't wear his masks. Based on his symptoms, based on his presentation, the rapid onset, his history, and starting this new job, I'm like, you probably have a mold infection. And so he said, why don't we test for it? I want to be sure. Got a urine test. Lo and behold, came back for super high levels of okra toxin A, or OTA, a very common
Yeah.
mold infection. Pull it out of his system. 7 weeks later, symptoms are completely gone. Now he was 12 or 16 weeks when we finally discharged him. It was just in, I think, just late last year, early this year. And no drugs, no meds, went back for his scans and scopes and colonoscopies, and there's no more disease. And guess what? He's still Jewish. And so it has nothing.
That didn't change. Genetics
Nothing
are
to do.
still there.
Genetics, here's the thing, genetics can be exploited. If you have a weak link in a chain and you pull that chain, it breaks at the weak link. If you have a genetic predisposition to expressing inflammation through this pathway, you can get 10 people in a room. They all get exposed to mold. One gets Parkinson's, one gets asthma, one gets arthritis, one gets Crohn's, one gets colitis, one gets IBS, one gets nothing. Everyone can experience it differently. You
Right.
just had the genetic predisposition to being infected in this area. And
Yeah.
that's all it is. And this is why I say it can be
Wow.
reversed. It's never
Wow.
random. We're just looking in the wrong places.
Yeah. So how do you do this? Like, do you do blood tests? I mean, mold test, like what's your process? This is like literally fascinating. You're like a body detective.
Kind of. Well, how much time have we got?
A few more minutes.
Okay, I'll try to make it quick.
Okay.
Luckily I booked a whole hour. I wasn't sure if we needed it, so I'll make it quick. The long and short is we have to look through symptomatology. There is testing, but people spend several thousands, if not tens of thousands, kind of spraying and praying, going and getting urine tests and blood tests and hair tests and toxin tests and viral testing. They go, oh, you got Epstein-Barr. We all have Epstein-Barr, but your body is so compromised it can't keep it in check. So what we have to do, it's through the art of symptomatology. And some people go, well, it's symptoms. Well, symptomatology is a language. We have to learn how to speak. And if you integrate yourself in one language for long enough, like I went to Mexico in my early 20s. After a week, I was like conversational basic, just getting around, getting directions. You can pick it up when you're immersed. We've seen hundreds of cases of Crohn's and colitis, so we see a lot of the same symptoms. Your digestive system speaks to you, but it only has about 14 words in its vocabulary. Constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloat, pain, cramping, blood, mucus, increase, decrease appetite, nausea, vomiting. These are the words it knows how to speak. But you and I, Ruth, we can't have a very meaningful conversation with just 14 words. We get very lost very quickly. So
Yes.
your body as a whole, your blood work, your symptoms, your skin, your moods, your hormones, there's about 13,000 different symptoms or words in its vocabulary we can look at, literally 30 quadrillion combinations of them all that we can look at. And so the more fluent we get with the language of the body, you can have a basic get around, get what you need, please and thank you with 100 to 500 words in most languages. So even learning basics of symptoms, how your body is speaking to you outside of just your gut, it's 14 words. This can tell us what's going on. For example, anemia, SIBO conditions, hair loss, libido issues. Look at psoriasis, eczema, thyroid problems. These can all be very indicative, dry hands, dry feet, of, say, parasites. Whereas someone who might have acne and joint pain and brain fog or get electrocuted like on cars and doorknobs might be more indicative of candida or mold fungus. Someone who maybe has Tourette's, tics, seizures, maybe they eat bone broth or collagen and calcium supplements and have bloody stool, could be Clostridia because it actually bursts the bacterium and you get these spores everywhere, which ramps the immune system, causing bleeding. We have to learn to look into the symptoms. What
Yeah.
else outside of just your gut? And it's like gas, bloat, pain, are we seeing? So really, diverticulitis, gastritis, Crohn's, colitis, IBS, all these things look the same because there's only 14 words it can say. So we have to learn symptomatology. Once we can do that, it gets almost, I hate to say it, because a lot of people, I get the most opposition from people with the disease
Yeah.
or institutions who are supposed to help people with the disease when we bring these up. It is remarkably easy to fix in the right circumstances. And I don't mean that
Yeah.
to downplay someone's 2 decades of suffering. We've seen it all.
Right.
We've had people with a lifetime of it. We've had 2-year-olds with bloody bowels. It always comes back to a lot of the same stuff. We just have to learn how to read it.
Wow. That's really incredible. Like insanely incredible. And we're out of time, but I'm sure so many people who are listening to this are going to want to know, where can they find you? How do you find out more? Like, where do you get more information about what you're doing? Because this is truly something that our world needs it so bad. Like,
So bad.
why are we stuck in these paradigms of just pop a pill and It makes
money.
me crazy. I know it really is. I mean, it's easy to follow the money trail, and I hate it. I hate it because there's a
So
better way.
much.
There's a better way to live there. You don't have to suffer. And so how can people find you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm voting Ruth for president. Um, Easiest way to find me. We've got a podcast called Reversible. We've had some really amazing world-renowned guests on there. It's all about the gut, how it interacts with our world. I recently started a second podcast just on Crohn's colitis based on the lectures and teaching and trainings I give to my Facebook group. We do have a free Facebook. We have all kinds of information you can access. All that can be found at gutsolution.ca. That's all singular. .ca for Canada, gutsolution.ca.
Okay, awesome. And we will make sure that we include all of that in our show notes as well, so everybody can find you. And Josh, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom today. This was amazing.
It's
So
been a
great to
pleasure.
meet you, and I can't wait to hear more.
I'll look forward to it. Thanks so much, Ruth.
All right, guys, that about does it for this episode. I truly hope you found this topic as interesting as I did. And if you know someone else who might be interested, please be sure to send it their way. And then, of course, be sure to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you like to listen. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast to be notified of future episodes. And then I will see you back here for another new episode very soon.